Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Purple Quarter podcast. We have Varun Dua in the house, and very happy to have you here, Varun. I think we've been chasing you for a year to get you here. So,
I was waiting for COVID to kind of settle down because I didn't want to do this virtually.
sure.
You have a pretty nice office, so really glad to be here.
Thank you so much. For all those people who don't know Varun, this is your third stint as a founder. So there was
Yes.
Glitterbug,
Yes.
then CoverFox, and Acco.
Yeah.
And it's for people who look at insure tech as a domain, they find this to be quite non-sexy. But you've done this like three times in a row. Can we talk about that a little? Why did you think of insurance as a domain, and why did you?
So I don't think, as the cliche goes, I don't think I chose insurance. It kind of coincidentally chose me.
Okay.
And while these are three separate companies or three separate startups, as you may call it, for me it's just one continuum, one journey. I worked in insurance. I saw some things which I thought could be done better. Insurance, the sector, just the way the industry was working was very bereft of technology, right? Very sales driven and bank and branch and not customer focused. And we thought we could do something better with it. So, okay, Glitterbug, or my first company, was basically building software for insurance companies, saying, hey, how can we help them do some of the stuff better? That seemed not enough. So I said, no, I don't think this is still working. Maybe we need to be in the game and go B2C.
Right.
That's when CoverFox happened. Glitterbug actually pivoted into becoming, the same team actually pivoted into becoming CoverFox, where we were a marketplace for insurance, or we were trying to work with other insurance companies and get the products and the experience delivered to end consumers.
Right.
Somewhere during that journey, I thought, hey, this is still not enough. I think unless you manufacture the product and you give the whole, you control the product, the pricing, the claims experience, because at CoverFox, we could just sell, right? Claims was still done by, the insurance company. Unlike, let's say, a e-commerce marketplace where you are delivering the experience or delivering the product to the end consumer. I deliver a PDF, and then eventually the product consumption happens when a claim comes up. So as a distributor, you're really out of the fulfillment experience. You're out of the, you can't price the product. It's a complicated product to price. So insurance companies price it, they fulfill it, but you only sell it.
Right.
So that seemed to me was just not, delivering enough value, and we thought that we could do better. That's when Acco happened. So for me, it's just that one journey saying, okay, software is not cutting it. Marketplace is not cutting it. The final pinnacle is to be able to manufacture. So it's just one journey. Yes, it's unsexy, but I love the space. So I think it chose me, and I'm pretty glad where I am.
Sure. You've taken that Larry Ellison's quote very seriously that you put on LinkedIn, right? That
Yeah.
people will think that you're crazy, but you've done it like three times over.
Yeah.
So, but let's talk a little bit about the part that you've managed to innovate within the insurance side. Now, two things that come to my mind. Once, when we first time met, right, we spoke about when you were in CoverFox, we spoke about as an aggregator how you were doing this. And when we met at Acco, I very vividly remember where you spoke about this becoming a tech first company.
Yeah.
That stays in my mind forever.
Yeah.
Because I've not heard many founders who actually look at this from a regulated space saying this. How did that arrive in your mind?
So I think that when you look at the insurance business overall, there are 3-4 parts to it, right? One is the distribution or the selling part. Then is the pricing of the product itself. Like should I give Rupa her car insurance at 6,000 or 7,000 or 6,800 at what price? And then is the claims experience part. And then is there product innovation around it possible? That can I give someone a car insurance depending on how much they drive in a month compared to a flat price, for the year. If I drive 1,000 kilometers a month and you drive 500 kilometers a month, I'm twice as likely to have an accident.
Right. Sure.
So when you look at how you can sell, how you can deconstruct the product and make it slightly different, or how to do pricing, or how to do claims fulfillment, I think all of these can be done very, very well if you really keep technology the core. So I'm not saying I want to be tech first for the sake of being tech first. If I sell you direct to consumer, I shave off money for you because now we are no longer, as the customer and the manufacturer of the product, paying the middleman, which is the agent. So it comes to you cheaper. So technology means I'll sell directly to you. I need tech to be able to do that.
Right.
Then for pricing, I need data. I need, to be able to say, hey, Rupa's got a great credit score, or she's a safe driver. She's never defaulted on any of her loans. Likely to not be a fraudulent person. Will not take a small scratch and try to convert it into a big claim to, take money.
Right.
So I can price Rupa's policy more sharply, but I need data to be able to figure it out. And many variables can come in. We've seen that even iPhone users have very different claiming behavior from Android users, very starkly. Sometimes we are able to establish why it's happening. Sometimes we are just not able to establish, but it's happening.
Right.
That iPhone users claim more. That's what happens.
Wow.
So again, you need data to be able to figure out at what price it will happen, right? So when you talk about claims fulfillment, today insurance companies are treated traditionally as guys who pay the bills, saying, okay, your car has had an accident, you'll take it to the workshop, I will pay the bill. Or someone's ill, you'll go to the hospital, I will pay the bill. So they don't provide any fulfillment experience. It's not like you can click a button and I'll pick up your car, repair it, give it back to you and say your claim is done and you don't have to look at any paperwork.
Sure.
At least as a consumer, I would want that experience. I don't want to take it to a workshop, talk to the insurance guy, do the paperwork, then chase down the car dealer and the insurance company for my money and deal with 3 people trying to do it. If I've had a small accident, I would love to press a button, somebody picks it up, repairs it, delivers it back, and I don't have to do any paperwork, and it's all paid for.
Right.
Now, when you look at this entire value chain, I think there's no way to solve it unless you're tech first. So otherwise, you'll get stuck. So we can price it better, we can sell it cheaper by removing the middleman, we can provide better fulfillment experience. So that's why vividly, it'll always be a tech first, because I don't think there's any other way to solve it.
Great. Yeah. Did you have pushbacks when you thought of this like tech first? Because going back to the subject of this being highly regulated, and of course you can't make too many shifts as well.
Yeah.
So do you think that happened during your journey?
So I think more than regulated is also a view overall, whether you look at the ecosystem, that it's a complex category, complex product, and needs human intervention to explain, to sell. It's always been known as a push category, right? It's not a pull.
Correct.
Pull category. So therefore, would we be able to do this without too much human intervention? It can't be zero, but that was the bigger question. From a regulatory standpoint, I think it was great because the regulator wanted new models to come in. The regulator wanted to see that so much excitement is happening in payments, in lending, nothing's happening in in insurance. Why can't there be a digital first or tech first company in insurance? They were not clear whether it will succeed or no, but they were willing to try. So I'll always be thankful that the regulator was at least willing to try. But the narrative around Accord, to be honest, about 4 years ago was, will a direct to consumer insurance company, or we're a tech first insurance company with no branches, no salespeople, no banks aiding the sales, no agents, no brokers, actually, is it even possible to build it out at scale? Maybe niche, chota mota, you can create a company worth 200, 300, 400 crores of business can happen online, but it's too complex a category to be dealt with this way. I think that narrative is something, touchwood, I think we've been able to break. Which is the question we used to get from our investors right at the beginning. How big can this be?
Right.
We know the space is big, but within the space, the model that you're choosing, is that going to be, because it's just there are 25 insurance companies in India, all have like 100 plus branches, millions of people, they're there in every nook and corner, and there are big brands, ICICI, HDFC, SBI, brands we've grown up with, we know to trust them. Why would you even, you're a digital first company, you don't have any physical presence, and you're telling the customer that, trust me, don't trust SBI, or don't trust ICICI. Not like you're saying don't trust, but trust me over them, right? Like in some sense. So I think that was because it's not a category where you were saying any fly-by-night operator I'll hand over my money to. I want the comfort that you will be around when I need the claim, right? So therefore more people tend to gravitate towards the SBIs and the ICICIs and so on and so forth, because institutionally okay, these companies have been there for a long time. Right. So I think breaking that trust barrier on top of it, without any physical presence where they can't see a branch or they have nobody to talk to, was the tough part. But I think we've all been, I also had my doubts, to be honest, but I genuinely felt that the consumer is changing. And if you do things transparently, people will bite.
Sure.
And I think that has helped.
So 11 years, right? 2010 is when you started your first gig. So
Yes.
it's been
Yes.
11 years
Yes.
in what you've been doing. It's
Yeah.
interesting. So if we move slowly into what you just, I'll take a cue from, you started saying that, hey, we're meeting late because of COVID. Let's talk a little bit about COVID. Did that impact, what you guys are doing? Because at the end of the day, did the insurance claims go up? Was it more riskier to be in this domain?
I think when the first wave hit, it was chaos.
Okay.
It was complete chaos because okay, let me zoom out a second. All insurance can't be looked at. One of the things that generally the narrative goes is that insurance push, pull, high claims, low claims, what is happening to the industry. I think every category within insurance operates very differently.
Okay.
The same customer, when he's buying car insurance, he is price conscious.
True.
But the same customer, when he's buying health insurance, he's value conscious. He suddenly stops being price conscious because with my health, I want, hey, if I go to Apollo, will you pay all my bills?
Right.
Versus on car insurance, the police may catch me if I don't have it on time. I know I need it. Can I save $500? So that same customer behaves very differently. Category to category. Life insurance, maybe I don't want to trust anybody apart from ICICI or LIC. That's why
Right.
if you look at insurance, LIC still has 70% market share in the life insurance business.
Sure.
It's just like, because I don't know what will happen 25 years from now. But LIC to rahega, But the same customer is very happy to try an ACO or a Digit or some new company on car insurance because I can, if you do a bad job with me, next year I'll switch
Sure.
to somebody. I can switch, right? So insurance, firstly, I think just don't, I think people's decision-making frameworks are chalk and cheese. Even within each category, they think very differently as to what their motivation is. Likewise, when COVID hit, different things happened. We made our business fell because people said that I'm not driving my car, so I can insure it later.
Right.
It's just lying at home for 2 months. So April, May, like nobody was buying. The other business that we did was we were insuring gadgets, we were insuring people who were taking Ola rides. E-commerce was not delivering.
Yeah.
Nobody was taking a cab ride, so we had a pretty bad hit, right? Like none of the categories were working for us. But what product was selling like hotcakes was health insurance because suddenly everybody realized I want health insurance. This nobody wanted. And suddenly say I don't have health insurance and I'm seeing people getting hospitalized and coming up, breaking up bills of 5 lakhs, 10 lakhs, God knows what is happening. And everybody suddenly wants, health insurance.
Wake up alarm. Yeah.
Wake up alarm for
Yeah.
everybody. So, from the claim side, when you ask, is it risky to be in this business? It was risky if you had underwritten a lot of health insurance because you had never priced that so many people go to hospital.
Sure.
Yeah. But if you had written auto insurance, you were fine because there were no accidents.
Right.
So you were actually highly profitable in that time because if every month 20% of your car portfolio was having accidents, it came down to zero. There were just no claims for 3 months.
Sure.
So it was a mega profitable time, but also nobody was buying new car insurance, but everybody was buying health insurance. So I think all in all, that period was quite complex. Some things were working well, some things were not working well, but broadly, I think it's been very good for a company like ACO. After I think August of last year, anything you can buy through a screen today is zooming, right? Like my parents order everything now. They didn't order before COVID. They would go to the market to buy stuff. Now they just order.
Sure.
So likewise, the same thing has happened to insurance. And if you can buy it online, you just don't want to meet anybody or do any paperwork. And health as a category, the amount of awareness that has happened is probably more than any public service health campaign that you should buy. Mutual fund sahi hai, health insurance sahi hai. Whatever you can keep shouting from the rooftops, but there's, like you rightly said, there's never been a bigger wake-up call for India that we need to have health insurance, and anything can happen anytime. So I think post-August things have been good because people are more comfortable buying online. People want to buy more insurance.
Sure.
So post-August, it's been a revelation for us. I think April to August was bad, but with the same kind of marketing spends, the same kind of investments that we were doing, everything just tripled post-August.
Wow.
But April to August was everything less than halved, but then it picked up. So
So it moved from
emerges.
push to kind of a pull,
Yeah,
right?
big pull,
Yeah.
big pull.
Do you think it'll stay, the pull?
I'm not so sure. I think for a certain cohort it'll stay. I would, as a founder, I'd love for it to stay. But as generally, I think people have short memories and people recover. And saying after a year, maybe we're all sitting in a room now. It doesn't seem odd. Maybe 6 months ago, just sitting in the room would
Yeah,
be
it was
odd.
odd. Yeah, true.
Maybe a year later, people would have forgotten about it, and maybe that euphoria or that panic that I need something, maybe it'll die down. But at least it's awakened people up. It's like saying, okay, health insurance demand or some insurance demand was here, pandemic, it went here. But now I don't think it'll come down to the same bottom. It'll settle somewhere in the middle, which will be a higher base anyway, which
Sure.
should be helpful. Yeah.
With this kind of scale going up and you being a cloud platform,
Yeah.
and I'm sure there's a lot of data that you guys manage.
Yeah.
How do you take care of a customer's data, from a security standpoint? How does that work for Acco?
So I think there are two things. One is a policy around it, and the second is the actual execution around it. I think from a policy perspective, what we are very clear is we do not use customer data without consent.
Sure.
So even if I know, so our app, for example, even on Android, will not read your contacts, not read your stuff, and do all of those things. I can read a lot to underwrite you better. The more I know about you, the sharper I can get about underwriting you. But we use a lot of data on customers to be able to price them better, but nothing which is surreptitiously done, right? So if there's a customer who's bought mobile phone insurance from me, and 6 months later he comes and buys, car insurance from me.
Right.
If he's done some fraud on the mobile insurance side, of course I'll use that data. The customer may not know that I'm linking his profiles, checking a bunch of these things, but we're not doing any surrogate stuff where I'm, sort of scraping his data from bureaus and this and that, and where he doesn't know. I think that at a policy level, we've just ensured that our model is sustainable. And tomorrow, if GDPR kind of things or more complicated data rules hit our country, we're not found, sort of flouting or wanting. From a implementation of security standpoint, I think the right person to ask that question would be Vish, who you've already interviewed. But broadly, I can tell you that I think security is more of a framework rather than one particular piece. I think as a young company, where young and regulated, it came into our fold of things much earlier. Where now every application that we develop, every piece of software that we develop, every product that we launch, security is sort of inbuilt, rather than an outside, patch or a layer that's done. And more technically, I would just say that even inside the company, the security, who has access to what data is. I think most of the craziness happens inside. Sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally. I think that's where we've been very, very careful from an implementation standpoint, that who in the company has access to what data.
Got it.
While the broader tools are all available to keep the data secure, encrypted, and so on and so forth, what over the last 1 year we've been able to do is ensure that people have access to data as much as needed, or they have access only to mass data. And customer data is probably, it takes 3 levels to get to 3 levels of approvals to unlock any customer
Lovely.
data. Yeah.
Nice. I think this would be super helpful for customers who are listening to this, right?
Yeah.
I have an Acco insurance for my car as well. So,
Yeah, good. You should buy another car and get another.
Sure. So if let me actually move further and talk a little bit about what's happening around. If you look at what's happening around, lending is a big thing, and how crypto has actually taken quite a bit of space and attention from a lot of people, blockchain specifically. So do you see something of this sort without any kind of regulations happening for insurance, where
Peer-to-peer kind of stuff?
yeah, peer-to-peer kind of stuff?
I've always wondered whether it could happen. I've always also thought whether Acco could play a part in some way in a peer-to-peer kind of platform. Frankly, and I've been seeing what's happening in China, where there was a peer-to-peer insurance platform. It has scaled well, and then just got into a lot of complications.
Right.
So I do feel eventually it'll happen, but that eventual could be as far as 10, 15, years away. See, the problem with so it's not like it's a new peer-to-peer is not a new model just because blockchain or all of this stuff exists. If you know, globally a lot of insurance companies are called mutual, you know, Liberty Mutual, or this mutual is peer to peer, like you're, you know, in where the company who's managing it is only keeping a small processing fee or just like a management fee, but the risk is pooled and it's all peer to peer. So I'm just a platform which is just sort of maybe taking 1% to manage this whole thing. What we are essentially saying is remove this 1-2% also, because blockchain can, you know, handle it and so on and so forth.
Right.
See, the issue with the insurance is that when you need the money, you're desperate. You know, if let's say your next of kin is in the hospital and you need 20 lakhs for treatment or 10 lakhs for treatment, a peer-to-peer network building that level of trust that money will be available to me. You know, here today what happens is if you bought an insurance policy from me, I'm regulated by the regulator. That regulator is being looked at by the government. So there is so many levels of checks on me that you have the comfort that I will pay you. You know, in a peer-to-peer situation, unless that trust fabric is established at scale at a level that when I need my 20 lakhs, it will be available. And it's not going to be dependent on some complicated situations, and there is, you know, so we all need some security, right, that this will work. You know, to reach that level, I think it'll take some time, or even for people to develop that level of trust, and even for regulators to, you know, if I put money in a mutual or a peer-to-peer platform or whatever it is, and tomorrow if I don't get my money at the point of claim, the regulators will ban it.
Right.
You know, yeah. So
sure.
I'm not quite sure how it will evolve, and if it has to, I think it'll take much longer than maybe not in the next 5-6 years.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. No, that's interesting. But can you tell me also in terms of, you know, if are there any other innovations that you see that's happening at ACO that, you know, you'd like to talk about on this podcast, apart from what we've heard?
Yeah, I think one of the things that ACO is very excited about, as a team, we are very excited about, is electric vehicles, because we believe that the way insurance will be done will be completely different.
True.
So we've also now, you know, got a team now specifically looking at EV.
EVs. Okay.
Because unlike a combustion vehicle or a regular petrol car or petrol bike or whatever it is, hardly there are any moving parts in the vehicle.
Right.
40% of the cost of the vehicle is the battery. You know, the risk has changed. If it might end up becoming a battery warranty insurance, you know, like where a battery will last, rather than more about because the battery goes off, 40% of the cost. So imagine buying a 10 lakh car or a 1 lakh bike, and 40,000 is the cost of the battery. If something goes wrong with the battery, my 40% of the value of the vehicle becomes the claim, you know, in some sense. So whether batteries will last, whether you know, they could catch fire, you know, how are batteries being used, slow charge, fast charge, what kind of risks that they, all our basements 5 years from now, I can bet will have
sockets. Yeah.
Everybody will have sockets.
Yeah.
Those basements could catch fire because the power is not done well. You know, we've tested some of these things, and we've realized that even charging 10 cars in a basement could pull the whole grid down unless the power is managed well. Or in India, most of our basements have seepage, right? There's some pani happening here or there, little bit, you know, some older buildings
Short
are not.
circuit, yeah.
So much that could go wrong, you know. This whole ecosystem is just going to completely change. So I think one of the places that we're excited about is that how do we use monitoring whether the charging and that installation has happened well, how do we monitor the battery, how do we integrate with the OEMs of the manufacturers of the EVs, and what would these insurance products even look like, is something that we don't know too much, but we're quite excited about, and this is one area I think will be big in the next few years.
Excellent. Just deviating from all of this, I wanted to ask you a question which keeps ringing in my head, right? Before this, you were in Mumbai, but then you all moved to Bangalore.
Yeah.
So for some of the founders who keep coming to me and keep asking, why can't we build everything in Mumbai?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts between Mumbai and Bangalore?
But don't try Bombay. is my verdict. I have done, like I said, I did CoverFox out of Bombay. And I was quite clear that our simple thought was we couldn't scale engineering. We just could not get the kind of people that we wanted. I don't think we learned enough
Right.
to even know what kind of people are available or needed, right? Like, forget, one is that acha talent nahi mil raha hai. The second is your own worldview is also limited to the pool that is you are able to access, right? You're not able to even see that there could be a world outside. So when we were contemplating, we were pretty clear that we'll have to get out of Bombay. The decision was not necessarily Bangalore, but Bombay was definitely,
Sure.
so we had 4 options actually. We actually evaluated: should it be Bangalore, should it be Hyderabad, should it be Pune, or maybe Gurgaon. And we said, because we're moving out, might as well go to the hotbed, because everything is going to be alien to us to start figuring out from scratch. Over the last 4 years, I've been in Bangalore personally for about 3 years, a little
3
over
years,
3 years
yeah,
maybe.
yeah.
Yeah. I think one of the best decisions Acco ever took. I think, you were instrumental in hiring Vish and our CTO. I don't think those kind of people we would have, even the talent somehow just gravitates back to
The location, yeah.
to the location. And not only the tech talent, I just think that the ecosystem is groomed in a way that even the business folks that you hire, pure PNL leaders, I'm not even talking product guys, pure PNL folks that you hire know how to partner with product and technology.
Right.
Because they have been groomed in an ecosystem or worked at companies where they talk the same language. Because most of our stuff always in our kind of companies is always going to be cross-functional. Unless the PNL guy, the product guy, the tech guy, they work jointly, you're not going to be able to deliver, much.
Right.
And if your business guy knows how to partner with product and technology, who knows what product can deliver, what technology is possible, not possible, even the business folks get you that flavor, which is very, very difficult. Bombay is great for marketing talent. Bombay is great for legal talent. Bombay is great for financial services, core talent, treasury, and all of that. We still have an office in Bombay. Some of our stuff still happens in Bombay.
Sure.
But that's that talent,
Right.
But if you really want to build a technology-oriented company at scale, I would still say, Bangalore. Maybe to some degree, I would say even Hyderabad is not a bad choice.
Right. So, Varun, you guys are very clearly an insurtech startup, because at the end of the day, even you took the risk of moving locations as well. It's a very different way of thinking, right? At the end. So, this is brilliant, because this is a question that I get asked often. And when I tell them that Bangalore, they probably think that I'm sitting in Bangalore, so it's more favorable for us to look at Bangalore, right? Thanks for actually talking about it. So let's deep dive and understand, what are you going to do with the current scenario? Certain companies are doing work from anywhere approach.
Yeah.
Some of them are doing it from the office. Like, we are 80% in the office. You can see that.
Yeah.
How is it working for you guys? What's
So
the
we're
plan
still
plan?
not fully back in the office. It's still flexible. Some people have started coming to office, not all of them. Maybe we are 25-30% full on a few days. Maybe even that's a higher number. Our thought process was that to sort of create the policy of whatever we will need to do post Diwali, because we realized that a lot of our teams had gone back to their hometowns and still
Sure.
working from there, and I'm sure they'll want their Diwali breaks and stuff like that. That does make sense to
Disrupt that, yeah.
disrupt that, and then so we'll most probably be doing whatever we will do post Diwali or in a couple of weeks from now. What we're leaning towards is actually, we all have to recognize that the world has changed, and I've gotten used to working from home. So there will be some sort of flexibility that gets built in, but at least what we're leaning towards is having the same amount of flexibility and the same amount of inflexibility applicable to everybody.
Right.
Rather than actually keeping it, okay, you're a remote employee, you're an on-site employee, and I think it just creates disparity in the team. It creates challenges, and we've seen even some global companies having differential comps for whether you're a work from home.
Correct.
I don't think, personally, I'm not of that worldview. I don't subscribe to that. Just because you're coming to office doesn't mean you're more valuable, and just because you're sitting at home, neither is true.
Sure.
Right? So I think where we are leaning towards is having enough flexibility that people can work from home, but they need to be in office for some time, but ensuring the rule is the same for everyone, rather than you're saying, hey, you're fully remote, you're half remote,
Sure.
you're fully on
So it's
site.
more like a hybrid culture. That's
Hybrid culture. Yeah.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure. So, Varun, for all those people who want to come and apply to Acco,
Yeah.
And it's lovely to know that what you guys are building, how you're innovating. It's a very tech first culture. So what is it that you want to tell people? If they have to come and join you, what is it? What is one trait that one needs to have to join ACO?
I think two things that we have learned that we need to look at very closely when we get people, especially mid senior senior. When they're handling more people or they're responsible for cross functional tasks or goals or is one, a sense of security in themselves and their skill set. Forget what they know. Are they good product managers? Are they good tech folks? Are they good marketeers or whatever it is? How secure that person is, or how insecure do they get with roles, designations, uska portfolio, my scale, my team.
Sure.
I think that's something that we've really, a sense of security. Is that person secure within their own and has the confidence that if I do well, I will get my reward.
Right.
The second thing that we're looking at is how much patience that person has, because unfortunately the Bangalore or just the general Indian ecosystem is just there's no patience, and I feel actually quite bad for some of the folks who think that they're in a hot job market and maybe are getting 30, 40, 50% hikes every 6 months, 1 year, whatever it is. None of them are actually, in my view, creating any wealth for themselves, because you can get a few lakhs extra for sure, but it's just done so many times. We all hear about the 200 people that became millionaires, half multimillionaires from Flipkart. We the ones who did stayed. The ones who who went through the ups and downs, who went through the times where their career was not moving at the best, where they didn't have the best role, but they accommodated, they worked for the firm, they had the cause more important than, hey, this year I didn't get the promotion, so I'm unhappy and therefore I need to find something better. So my genuine, if unsolicited advice, if it may be for all the folks who, is that if you can just, pick a place where you truly believe in the team and the cause and the founders and give it 4-5 years, you'll most likely make the money. Think of yourself as an investor who's picking a stock, right? Like rather than you're a day trader right now,
Sure.
and sometimes you'll win, sometimes you lose, but they're definitely not creating wealth. You stay invested for 4-5 years in a place which is reasonably doing well, you will make 10 times the money with that compared to 20 lakhs more or 5 lakhs more that you would have got. So I think two things that we've started to look for very strongly: sense of security and sense of patience. I don't think we get it right all the time, but I think these are two traits that we really value. That
Sure.
that are how short term or how if you don't have patience for about 3 years, 4 years to build something. I'm not even saying 10 years, 15 years. 3 to 4 years is minimum time. The first 12 months you're learning, then you start contributing. By the time you're gone,
Right.
I think that worldview I think people should have.
Great. So you basically are calling out for all entrepreneurs who can think like an entrepreneur and still be
Yeah.
part of the entire system. I think that's what you want them to be seated in the organization, right?
Yeah, and not just because we think that they need to do this for us. I think it works for them. It's just that people don't
Realize that. Yeah. You're not
realize
there.
it.
You're not there enough, right? So
Yeah, you're just not there enough,
Yeah.
to know that you could have. We've had situations in our office where people who have done all the grunt work when the company was small, and now that we've hit scale, now that we have much higher access to capital, the valuations are going up. Their ESOPs could have been worth millions, have left.
Sure.
But they did all the hard work.
Right.
I don't know why they left. Some of them, it's just the same thing, right? Some of them just optimize for next 12 months or next 6 months or the next bonus or the next role. I think that's something the ecosystem could develop a little bit of maturity would be great for all the companies, I feel. Yeah.
Sure. As one last question, you've been a serial entrepreneur. So any wise words for people who are budding aspirants who want to become founders or
Yeah. I think it's the same thing. It takes much longer than you imagine. So I don't think serial is probably not the way I would describe it. For me, it's that one insurance thing is like, okay, should I build software? Should I sell? Should I make the product? For me, it's
Alright,
one,
that's very modest. Okay, yeah.
one same continuum. It's not like I moved from, edtech to e-commerce to financial services and, so some different spaces. To me, it's one continuum of a problem. It just needed a license to solve it or a different
Sure.
company to solve it,
Sure.
in a certain way. my only advice would be to stick to that one thing, and don't enter it if you can't give it 10 years. Is
10 years, okay.
minimum.
All right.
A minimum. After that, you may anyways do well, and but a lot of places, if we do hear of all the, there are 10, 15, 20% entrepreneurs which I've seen who've got it right the first time, scaled well. But 9 times out of 10, that's not the story. 9 times out of 10, there is a 10-year journey behind where people are. Whether you talk to somebody like Bhavish, there is a travel company behind it, or there's such a long journey to get to where you are. I think my only advice is, if you're not in for a decade, at least to solve the space or adjacencies and pivot and figure it out, don't do it, because then your chances are only 10% of hitting it right.
Sure. It's an awesome piece of advice. I think you're asking them to be PhDs, spend 10 years, solve the same problem, see how it works out.
Maybe that's what worked for me. So maybe the bias.
Sure. Thank you so much for being on our show, Varun. Really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for coming and doing this.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Great to be here.